It's all about the questions, where learning to ask the right questions can help you achieve lifelong success. Now, here to help you ask all the right questions is award-winning author, international speaker, and business strategist, Laura Stewart.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. As you know, it's my favorite time of the week, and I'm so excited that I've been able to bring the show back, doing 2 shows a month now, so my energy is coming back from the depths of long COVID and illness, and I am so excited with all the guests I've had back on the show, and today I have somebody truly special. Well, I know I say that about every guest I have on the show, but this is somebody that I have followed forever. And then I realized the other day that it's not been forever because he only started his wildly successful blog in, I think it was 2010, Leadership Freak. I have the one and only Dan Rockwell on the show today. We are going to be talking about leadership. We're going to be talking about self-awareness, writing, and today he launches his book that he co-authored with, as you know, one of my favorite people in the universe, John David Mann. The Vagrant launches today. It is a wonderful parable book about the inner journey of leadership, and we're going to be talking about the book today and the lessons in it. But more than that, we are just going to have a conversation with somebody that I highly respect and that has been, I think, over 500,000 people, I think, might be following him on all of his social at this point. In virtually every country, somebody is reading his blog at any moment in time. And I know I've probably completely embarrassed him at this point in time. So with that, I am going to bring Dan on camera. And yes, I think I did embarrass him a little bit.
Hey, hi, Laura. Good to see you.
Yeah,
It's wonderful to be here.
So happy to have you there and here. And just to say that I've read The Vagrant. I read it months ago. John kindly sent me an advance copy, as he does every time he starts writing something. And he goes, I'm not going to be doing the touring a lot on this one. Dan is. Do you think you'd be willing to have Dan on? And I'm like, oh my God, yes. So I want to start out with something. When you and I were chatting before the show a month or so ago, you talked about you had wanted to write this book for 10 years. And I was shocked when I realized you had never written a book before. Your blog is renowned around the world, 300 words or less, then you get deeper into it. And it's like this insightful bite of wisdom that people can absorb easily, work with, let it mull around in their mind. Typical question a lot of people ask, Dan, is why this book now? But I really don't want to ask that. I want to kind of show up something that you put on one of your blog posts. And I love this because I'm a Boston Terrier fan, as people can see by my pillows. Do something where failure matters. You talked on one of your blog posts about how you weren't ready to write the book. You were a little fearful about writing the book. And then you got introduced to John and he said yes. Was it about you were afraid of taking your work to a bigger realm, or was there something else? Because you've talked about self-awareness, self-reflection, failure, putting yourself out there for so long. It just surprised me that you hadn't written one yet.
Well, you and others have asked over the years, where's your book? What's your book? Why don't you just put your blogs together? I'm always chasing the next idea. And so I hardly remember what I wrote about today because I'm always thinking about the next thing, and putting something together didn't make sense to me. And I've contributed to books, and I'm thankful for that. But I honestly didn't feel, and I'm not saying, let me say, the words I have are, I didn't feel big enough. And what I mean by big enough, I don't mean big enough in that there wasn't a following. I meant in my own heart, I just didn't feel ready. And it was daunting to me. I have a very short attention span. So I write 300 words a day. Takes me an hour and a half or so, 2 hours sometimes to, you know, get something out in the morning. And I got to, this idea of, that longer process was really challenging to me. And it took a while. I learned a lesson. If I could jump right in and just say,
Yeah.
you mentioned John David Mann. I think one of the big lessons of leadership in life has to do with inviting the outside in, inviting people into your life. And I'm an introvert. I love my own company. I'm, glad to sit on the back deck and enjoy my own company and do my own thing. And it's taken me a while to learn and appreciate to bring people into your life. And so when the story, I did have the story. I did try to write it. I was not happy with anything that I was able to produce. And long story short, got to John David Mann, who, when talk about bring the outside in, I figured I'd just reach high. And I know John is like one of the best. And so I was delighted when he said yes to me, and we were off to the races.
There really is nobody better than John David Mann if you want somebody in your corner when it comes to writing. And, he's launched, I think, the last 10 books on my show that he's done with various people, including his wife. Because you said it was a hard ask for you and you reached high, and that sometimes asking for help is one of the hardest things to do, especially for entrepreneurs, right? And somebody like yourself, I'm going to guess, because you're considered an expert on leadership, right? Is there something that you asked yourself or somebody posed to you that sort of created this breakthrough, a block that enabled you to reach out?
Wonderful question, Laura. And it was a process for me of realizing that life is so much richer and so much bigger when we invite people into our lives. And that was a process. I've had people reach out to me over the years, and I would frequently put them off. And I will say to people, if we're friends and we've been friends for very long, you probably worked pretty hard to get there. And I'm not proud of that. It's like it limits life. But I started thinking about, if someone shows up at your door unexpectedly, at least invite them in. At least, welcome them in and have conversations. And I started reaching out in more recent years. I've actually started being more active in this and reaching out to people or authors that I talked to years ago. Hey, we talked way back. I just like, can we just check up? No agenda. And what I'm learning is life is just so much richer with people like you in it, relationships that are unexpected. John David Mann has made my life better. And it just started to make sense to me. So it still feels a little awkward to ask for things. And I think it's important is if you're a leader, if you're a leader, you got to get used to asking for things.
Right.
And it still feels awkward. I still love to just like, I'm an ox. I'm just going to put my head down and I'm going to do my business. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
that's sort of like, how I look at it. So it was a process of coming to see how silly it is to exclude people from your life, and how wise it is to surround yourself with really smart people. Someone said, "Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future." And boy, oh boy, is that the truth.
And yet, in so many cases, at all levels of achievement, we often go, that person would never want to speak to me. So we stop ourselves from reaching out and engaging. I know myself, the first 5 years this show was on broadcast radio, and I felt more comfortable asking for the bigger get for somebody to be on my show when it was on broadcast than when the radio station went to oldies music. So my show was now gone because it was no longer talk radio and it just went to podcast. It became more difficult to ask for a bigger get. And I had one person turn me down because all they cared about was how many followers did I have, something like 100,000 followers. And I didn't even answer them because it annoyed me that they even asked for that. And I said, I don't want that person on the show. But at the same time, I really wanted that person on my show because I loved their message that they were talking about. But it began getting me to question whether their message was what I felt the message should be about, to serve others, or whether it was just about something else. So when you're speaking, Dan, about inviting others in, does any of those thought processes go through your mind? And if it does, how do you let go a preconceived notion of what that interaction should be like? Because I know my listeners out there, sometimes they're afraid to ask somebody because they're afraid to see behind the scenes, or they just think they're not worthy.
Mm, mm. I think, you're hitting on something very important, and that is our self-perception,
Mhm.
how we see ourselves. And it's okay, can we see ourselves as someone else might like to have a conversation with?
Right.
I worked with a consulting firm just outside of Philadelphia some years ago. We were working to develop a coaching culture with them, and wonderful organization, still friends. And I remember sitting around the table with the owners and leaders of that organization having a conversation, and something came up, and we had been working together on coaching for some time. So it was a very candid, vulnerable kind of conversation. And something came up, and I said, one of the things I don't do is sometimes I don't reach out to people because I don't want to bother them.
Mm.
And one of the owners of the company looked at me and he said, Dan, what would it take for you to stop feeling like you're bothering people? Wow. What a question.
Yeah.
So I think we have to understand our place and believe we have a place in the world, and then just start dipping our toe in the waters. So over the years, I started more recently. It's been last July, so it's a little over a year now. I reached out to John Spence. I had talked to John Spence years ago. He wrote this book, Awesomely Simple. They sent it to me. I talked to John, and I had called him on another occasion, and we had talked about something very specific. And I just reached out to him. I said, hey, John, and here's how, think about how to do this. And it may help if you have some sort of awareness of each other.
Right.
So I just reached out and said, hey, John, I was just thinking about you and remembering our great conversation and, how generous you were. And I was just thought we might have a conversation. I know you're busy. I just, no agenda. Just let's just catch up with each other. Long story short, over a year later, John and I have been having conversations every 3 weeks ever since. And we text together, we text back and forth, we send emails back and forth. John was extreme. I didn't ask John to do anything, but he made this wonderful little video that he posted on LinkedIn about the Vagrant, and that he liked it and that kind of thing. But it wasn't for that, right? It wasn't for what I was necessarily an endorsement for a book or something like that. It was the belief that relationships make life richer, and just keep trying. You never know. You're right. I've reached out to some people, and it's been sort of formal. So, hey, thanks for reaching out and blah, blah, blah. And maybe we do have a conversation, but you can tell
Right.
it's not really clicking. That's that's fine. Nothing wrong with that, right? But then you have somebody like John or others, and boom, you have a wonderful relationship. You text back and forth. How's the family? Hey, I got a question for you, and off you go. And now life is richer, life is bigger, life is fuller.
And you've got one of your fans and friends commenting, James McKay. He says, I'm one of the guys Dan talked about. He reached out to me to talk after I commented on his blog several times in a row. So proud and happy to see his book come out today. And he was also one of those annoying people. When are you writing a
Yeah,
book?
yeah. So
So
no,
James, thanks for being
yeah.
here. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, James. And you're right. James and I have talked a few times over the years, and wonderful guy. He was in software there for a while. I'm not sure we've lost touch, but yeah, thanks for jumping in here, James. I appreciate that.
In the book, The Vagrant, it feels like that's one of the themes as well inside the book, which is about relationships or the lack of relationships, forming this basis of you can keep striving for success and keep striving for success. And I don't want to give away anything about the book. I devoured the thing multiple times. I actually printed a PDF of it and dog-eared it and whatever. It's been lost somewhere along the way in I think 6-8 months since I originally saw it. But why is it that when it comes to leadership and success, that self-awareness, that trying to think of the right word, self-reflection, that's the word, that the self-reflection and relationships are so important so that success really happens? I mean, I'd like to explore that concept some more, because so often everybody talks about the leaders who are just single-minded and they're just driven and driven and driven, and they achieve these amazing successes, but then they crash and something happens and the business folds. But it seemed like they were on a trajectory where there's no way they're not going to receive the pinnacle of success. So can you talk to that some more, Dan, and why that was so important without giving away anything about the book, which is something to be devoured?
Well, thanks for bringing up the concept of self-reflection. It's an important part of the book. And frankly, if you ask a typical leader, tell me about your self-reflection practice. Before I tell you what I'm going to say, I have to say I'm originally a dairy farm boy from central Maine. So that's where this that's where this comes from. You ask leaders about their self-reflection practice, and they look at you like a cow looks at a new gate. It's like, what are you talking about? It's like, cows are very, they just go one way. And if you move the gate, they're stuck. They just don't know what to do next. So I think because we are so busy and so driven, and being busy and having goals and having vision are all essential, we start to neglect this self-reflection relationship sort of thing. Here's where they tie together, Laura. Self-reflection done in isolation leads to self-deception. Now, I'm not taking a pot shot at quiet self-reflection. I'm not taking a pot shot at, meditation. What I'm saying is we have the wonderful capacity to deceive ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel Kahneman wrote this book called Thinking Fast and Slow some years ago. It's filled with all the ways we deceive ourselves. And I remember reading that, and it was really it shook me because you start to think I'm making honest, open decisions, but not really. It's sort of like, it's sort of like you have a performance review, right?
Right.
And what do we talk about? The things that it's hopefully you're not doing the annual one anymore, but if you do the annual performance review, and what do you talk about? But the things that happened in the last 30 days, because we are biased toward near term, and the things that are most in front of us, those are the things that are most powerful. Anyway, the tendency of self-deception says to me that we need people in our lives. And sometimes they're going to say things to us that are feeling awkward or uncomfortable. And that's part of the journey. Those
Mm-hmm.
relationships are so powerful, right? Now, I love people who are cheerleaders in my life, and I have lots of cheerleaders in my life. But sometimes my cheerleaders also say, you know what, Dan? There's an issue here. If you want, I mean, I got a story about how this all happened because it
Please.
like, yeah, okay, yeah. I joke about I've fallen in love with my own voice and I talk too long. So
You're doing great, Dan. Loving
yeah,
having you.
raise your hand like this and say, "Oh, zip it, zip it." So,
It's always a balance, isn't it? Right? Listening
yeah.
and speaking, both of them combined. You're doing totally fine. Loving it. Tell the story. Now I'm on the edge of my
Yes.
seat, Dan.
Yeah. So look, there in the Vagrant, the protagonist Bob, he engages in self-defeating behaviors, but he doesn't see them. We all do this. Every bad thing or stupid thing or silly thing Bob did, I did. It's not a biography, but all the mistakes, they definitely come out of my life. And so it's a little humbling to read the story or have people read the story because, oh yeah. But I'm also aware that all of us at points in our lives have done self-defeating things. And I had people telling me, you can be pushy. I'm a teddy bear, Laura. I mean, I'm the nicest guy I know, right? My daughter one day told me, she was an adult at the time. She said, I think you like to scare people. And it's like,
Okay.
wow. It's like, no way. I want to release people. I don't want to scare people. So I sat down with my team one time, and I was seeking feedback. And this is important. You want to do this intentionally. You don't just want to say, how am I doing? Like needy, do you like me? Do you like me? You want to be very intentional. I was asking some specific questions. And I remember a lady on the team said, you can be pushy. And I said, I've learned, it makes me bristle, but I've learned, thanks for saying that. Try to calm your spirit there, big boy. Thanks for saying that. So she said it. I said, thank you. I said, could you help me with an example? And lots of times people can't. She said, not really, but it's just, something that I have a sense of. 2 weeks later, I was having a conversation with a person this way, face to face.
Okay.
And this woman was off to my left. I could see her in my peripheral vision. And while I'm having this conversation, she's going. Yeah.
Oh, for those who are only listening to this on audio on the podcast, go up onto my YouTube channels, up on LinkedIn or Facebook, because you have to see the gestures that Dan just gave and the expression on his face. Okay, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah. So anyway, she's pointing at me and she's nodding and indicating to me something's going on. I knew in an instant what pushy looked like for the first time in my life. And it wasn't like yelling. It wasn't, like grabbing somebody by the collar, but it was being passion can sometimes make us intimidating. And I'm passionate about things. And so I can come off unintentionally as pushy. So bringing this back around, self-reflection, we need people to speak into our lives. And then we get the opportunity to reflect on our journey and reflect on who we aspire to become a
Okay.
little more honestly. And so that was a very transformative moment.
And is that the root of the story in The Vagrant? Or that was just one of the pieces that pulled together the story of The Vagrant and Bob's journey throughout? Or not
That's
related at all?
no, you're right, because my journey really is Bob's journey, somewhat in the sense of learning to respect self-reflection, doing things that aren't helpful unintentionally. And that story is definitely part of the story. I think the major shift that happened for me, Laura, was coming to the point of realizing that leadership is not simply about doing stuff, but it's about being, it's about who you are.
Oh, wait, do say that one more time. That is really powerful. Say that one more time, Dan.
Well, it's not original with me, Laura. So, leadership, Warren Bennis said, leadership is becoming yourself. I had a conversation with Francis Hesselbein. I actually had 3 conversations that completely rocked my world, and they're really where the essence of the book began. So in 60 days, I had 3 conversations that shook me. One was with Jim Parker, who was the CEO of Southwest Airlines during 9/11.
Wow,
They
that's
sent me his
powerful.
book. I was so excited to talk to him. I thought, I want to talk to this guy. So we had this conversation. I said, Jim, tell me, what do you love to tell leaders? And he gave me the most underwhelming advice I think I had ever heard. He said, I love to tell leaders, be yourself. It's like, look, I'm a dairy farm boy from Central Maine. I'm not worried about being myself. I'm worried about milking the cows. I'm worried about getting the chores done. The second conversation happened a little while after that with Frances Hesselbein, and she received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She went to the White House. She said, we have to talk a little bit about, you have to give a presentation. And she said, I thought I should say something smart. And so she said, I gave my definition of leadership. My definition of leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. Now, when Frances said that to me, I started feeling like a hamster on an exercise wheel.
Oh, I've been there.
I cannot get a grip on this, right? It's so weird. It's just weird. And even today, when you say leadership is about how to be, not how to do, yes, you have to do, but we start with who we are. When you think about that, it just freaks me out. I had a third conversation that helped put it together, and you'll see that the essence, the essence of the books does connect to these 3 conversations that I had, and it was with Harry Kramer. Harry Kramer was the CEO of Baxter Pharmaceutical, tens of thousands of employees, traveled all over the world. When he was in college, he fell in love with a girl, and they started getting serious. And her dad heard about it and invited Harry to come visit during Christmas break while they were still in college, and so he could meet Harry. They weren't engaged. He didn't know it was his future father-in-law, but it was. Harry ends up in Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, and it's like, ay, give me,
Warm
Palm
clothes.
Beach. Yeah, give me whatever. But anyway, what people will do for love. So he ends up in meeting Tom Jansen. Tom says to him, I have plans for us. And that freaks me out too. I thought, well, maybe it's like we're going to sit in the basement, drink beer, and watch football. We're going to get to know each other, whatever, man
Right.
things, whatever you do.
Okay.
So Tom Jansen took Harry Kramer on a 3-day silent retreat.
Oh boy. Not
Oh
what was
boy.
expected.
Oh my word. So, and I'll tie this together here in a sec, these three conversations. But Harry said to me, Dan, I hadn't been silent for 3 minutes, much less 3 days. The first line of the blog post I wrote about my conversation with Harry Kramer, I just hung up the phone with Harry Kramer and my ear is on fire. He talks like a machine gun shoots. So this was a huge thing in his life. He said, Dan, I have never, and as far as I know to this day, he has never missed that 3 day silent retreat. It began for him a daily practice of self-reflection. Every day, at the end of the day, Harry engages in structured self-reflection, which we encourage people at the end of the book how to do this. And he asks himself a set of questions. I put those three conversations transformed my thinking from leadership is just about doing stuff to leadership is about becoming who you are. First, it was Jim Parker, be yourself. Look, if you're not yourself, you're going to be pulled in a million directions. Then the second conversation was with Francis Hesselbein. Leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. I still struggle. I need a how to, and that's where Harry Kramer came in. Now, how am I going to practice this on a regular basis? How am I going to become my aspirational self? And central to the process is a daily practice of self-reflection.
Listening to all the different parts of the story and all the thought processes that are going around in my brain and in my body as you're talking about it, I keep thinking about conversations I've had, not only with people I coach, but just people who have listened to the show and the comments they've made. One area that I see a struggle within myself, especially lately, and other people have told me they have the same struggle with my ear injury, being unable to be out there in the world that I used to be, just shutting down and thinking, well, I can't be that way anymore. I can't keynote, I can't travel, I can't be that networker that I was. We we often in our lives encounter moments where who we are internally, our character hopefully never changes, but how we manifest that in the world has to change due to whatever is going on. I mean, we saw this a lot with COVID, right? Where how people manifested who they are shifted and changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much for the better. When you're thinking about that aspect of character and manifesting your character, and how sometimes the realities of how we can be are, I'm still trying to formulate this whole thought here, Dan, and this whole question. And I'm known for asking questions, so sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I have to be brilliant. No, I'm just going to be me. This is how it is. I can't always come up with the totally clear question. But the idea of what I'm trying to get to, Dan, is our internal perceptions of who we are, our external perceptions of how we're perceived, like you with, you're not really a bully, but you're imposing, or all of that. You don't necessarily think that's how you're being, not how you want to be. You've always led beautifully, and now something happens and you're shaken to the core and you don't know how to be again. How would you unpack that for me and for my
Yes.
listeners?
Wonderful question and reflection yourself, Laura, on, just the journey. And frankly, it doesn't have to be a crisis or some sort of infirmity. Life changes, and we change and we grow. It may be something more catastrophic, more like a crisis. So I have a few things that come to mind that,
Okay.
I think that relate to this. First of all, I'm a huge fan of language about aspirational self.
Okay.
Be yourself. it concerns me that it devolves into self-indulgence. I just got to be myself, and I love the aspirational side of things. So, how do we get in touch with our aspirational self? I gave you a story because I've seen this happen with leaders I work with, and I've actually used it myself as well. So, we get in touch with our aspirational self by noticing our own energy levels. So when I'm having a coaching conversation with someone, I'm always, it's just a habit for me now. I notice, do they lighten up? Do they brighten up? Do their eyes go wide? Do they start talking more fluidly, right? Or do they kind of sink? Do they look down? Is the energy go? Here's the thing, and I'll give the illustration. One of the first times I noticed this, I was in Las Vegas. I received an email from a leader in Las Vegas who said, basically, I'm at the end of my rope. I feel like I'm on the interstate highway in Texas. There are no exit ramps, and it's 2 a.m., and I've been driving all day. So I ended up in Vegas, and we spent the day together. It wasn't exactly the most cheerful day. We did have dinner that evening. His wife, and he and I. Uh, and during that conversation, he went bright.
I love that moment.
Yes. Yes. And I was still, I had not formalized all of this in my own thinking, but I noticed it. And this is important. Noticing is, important. I said, hey, what's happening for you? I mean, you just lit up. He looked at me. He said, Dan, I love being a dad.
Oh,
Yeah, and so here's how it comes together. So first of all, he and his wife had raised 4 of their own children. They adopted 4 small children after they raised their own family.
wow.
I'm seriously, it's like that sounds like punishment to me. Don't get me wrong, love my family, but there's a new phase in life. He loved being a dad. I said to him, let me ask you, what happens in your thinking if tomorrow morning when you show up at work, you take the leader hat off, that hat you're supposed to be wearing, and you put your dad hat on? Now, you can't show up and say, Daddy's home.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy.
It's just in your heart,
Hmm.
right? I said, what would you do differently? First thing out of his mouth, I would hold people more accountable. I was totally shocked by this because I thought it was going to be, something more caring, whatever. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, look, at home, if I say the lawn has to be mowed before dinner, the lawn gets mowed before dinner. I mean, that's just, one way or the other, we're getting the lawn mowed. Saying he's at the end of his rope because he's doing other people's jobs for them. He's at the end of his rope because he hasn't learned how to hold people accountable. By the way, the end of this story, just a month or 2 ago, I received a text message from this gentleman. He was in South Africa. He sent me a text selfie, and he said, Dan, the most important thing I ever learned about leadership was lead out of who you are.
Mm.
Isn't that something?
And,
Yep.
and yet, so many people, like especially for women, if they were to bring the mom to the workplace, that's considered, it's a disparaging comment. And we're told, do not bring the mom to the workplace. But yet, him bringing a dad to the workplace actually helped. So, to the women who are watching, Dan, or listening, how could you see a way to help them manifest that perhaps into the workplace as a leader? Because you know that women and men are sadly perceived very differently with some of their character things.
Yeah, wonderful question, because the important thing here is that you find your own way to bring that into the world. if for example, you love being a mom and that's like your identity. My identity is granddad. I love
I can
being
see that.
Poppy. I love being Poppy, and I show up that way for people. I don't tell them that, but I treat them like my grandchildren. I I will say I say things today that I never would have said because I'm showing up as my aspirational self. For example, at the end of a conversation, I will say to some of these folks that I work with, and they're just working hard. You know what I'm saying? They're just working hard. I will say, you know, I just have to say, they're lucky to have you. Now that feels so good to me to say. That's what I said. That's what a Poppy would say, right? So back to mom. You have to kind of figure it out, and it doesn't have to be granddad or mom. But let me tell you something. Um, there's some such powerful, wonderful qualities when you think about bringing mom to work. This guy thought about bringing dad to work, and he thought about accountability as one of the first things that came to mind. A mom might be the same way, right? It's like, I'm not picking your room up, you know. Let's grab Junior by the collar and take him in, and he's gonna, take care of his own. But it might, I don't know what it's going to be. Listen, I have one client. He's in love with scuba diving, right? I'm not going to use his real name here, but he's Scuba Dave. You know what I'm saying? He shows up, I will text him once in a while and say, I'm imagining you walking the hallways of your company with flippers on and a mask, because he has a certain way of showing up when he understands himself through that lens. And I have a certain way of showing up when I have the lens of Poppy. It helps me, it softens that edge, right?
Okay.
Remember that feedback that I got?
Right.
That idea of I'm going to show up like this person, it helps me get out of my heart those things that I might have held back.
So when you're thinking about it, whether you're bringing mom to your leadership role or dad or Scuba Dave or whoever it is, it's not the actual in practice thoughts of all of that. It's okay, what is one aspect of mom and teaching kids or dad and teaching kids or how I'm being there that can translate into that role. It's not actually mom of picking up after the kids or dad of going to play catch with somebody.
Yeah.
It's accountability, or it's making sure everybody knows their chores and here's how they're going to do them, and making sure they have everything that they need to succeed. Is that a good sort of summarization of what we were just talking about to help some of my listeners start to put it in practice?
Yeah, thanks for pushing at this a bit and working for clarity, because I think it is important. And it's not just like one thing or one behavior, it's a lens, it's a way we see ourselves. And what does it mean to show up and see yourself that way? You could do this. I'm a huge fan of admiring people. And if I see my dad in myself, it's very fulfilling for me, and so there are other ways, there are other lenses. So I don't think it's so much of well, mom does this, but mom is this. It's not so much that a scuba diver does this as much as this is who I am when I'm scuba diving. And that's the person I aspire to be, which, by the way, for him, he likes to dive with sharks. He loves danger. He loves,
Okay.
I know it's all freaky to me, right? But he has a certain calmness about him when he's diving. And that's what he wants to bring to work. So I think I have another friend who, by the way, person I work with and friend, um, and he's the dad metaphor as well. I have another one who is a third baseman, a woman. She's like she loves, she, grew up on playing sports. She was the only girl on the team. She loved being the only girl on the team, right? And I love to play third. So what's that like? And now she has this sort of lens through which what does it look like when your third base person shows up at work? And now it's like, well, I'm not quite directive enough. The third, when you play third, sometimes you're saying, don't forget over here, and the next play is this. And you know what I mean?
Yes.
There are different ways that people will find expression to this. And the point is, it's not all things to all people. What it is just a way to kind of get in touch with your inner self, that best self, and find ways to bring that into the environment and into your relationships.
Okay, so feeding off of that, I had held up that picture of the Boston Terrier from your blog about failure and things. And, we know I'm a huge Boston Terrier fan, but the reason I brought that up at the beginning of the show was because sometimes as leaders, and all too often, I think, especially with the world changing so quickly nowadays, mistakes happen. And or something's misinterpreted. It didn't get delivered quite the way we wanted it to. Cancel culture, all of those different things are happening. We make a misstep in something we're trying to do, and it blows up in our faces. It's no longer a small private thing. So with all of that going on, from your wisdom, your knowledge, all these years of teaching leadership, coaching, what advice, what piece of wisdom, what questions would you suggest people begin asking themselves or looking at to help them when perhaps they've done something and it landed really hard, and that feels like a sucker punch in your gut,
Yes.
and you just want to shut down? I mean, I know some of this kind of gets it's a theme in The Vagrant too. Just thinking about that, it's a theme in that. But it's something that it's really hard to pick yourself up because you're mortified, embarrassed, ashamed, or the world crashes down because you made this public mistake that should have been a private one. Love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yes. Let me first begin by saying, if you're making big decisions about your organization that are very public, obviously you need to get a lot of counsel and feedback on how to do that, including language, right? But let's just think more about day-to-day kind of things.
Right.
So not too
Because they seem to
long.
be bigger sometimes, those day-to-day things.
And what it is it hurts the sincerity, because no one wants to intentionally offend people. No one wants to intentionally engage in self-defeating behaviors. And it's like, I was trying to do good and it turned out bad. And that's very disappointing. So not too long ago, I used a word on my blog that I didn't really think anything about. And someone chimed in fairly early and said, that word is offensive. And here's why. And you do have an initial, tens of thousands of people every week are reading what I write. It's like, you don't mean to do that. So my first response to that is, loser. Why do you do, you know what I mean? Because I have a loud inner critic, and he's not helping me. I can tell you that right now. But that's my first response. But then you have to just step back and say, I didn't know. I apologize. And so I have a hip pocket response, whether it's in person or here. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it. And then, I sometimes that's it. Other times it's like, I'm not gonna, I won't use that again. And then, and here's perhaps the most important part of that whole process: let it go. Don't do it again. Be kind if you have hurt somebody unintentionally, apologize. And if it comes up again, just like, or someone else brings it up, it's like, I know, that was just a dumb thing to say. I didn't intend to be insulting to people. And if I hurt you, I apologize. But the biggest thing is just keep moving forward. Don't let naysayers and critics, and sometimes remember, critics are right.
Yes.
Yes, right. So don't let naysayers or critics or wise critics defeat you. Don't be so down on yourself that it just weighs you down and you stop. Well, I guess I better just throw the towel in. No, don't do that.
Have you ever had a situation where you felt gut punched by the way something was received or the way something ended up coming out that was perhaps a failure that others perceived as a failure or that you perceived as a failure? And how did you work your way out of that?
Yes. Well, the more recent one is the one I just mentioned, writing a term that was considered pejorative or insulting to a smaller group of people. And first of all, I'm never going to use that word again.
Okay.
Right. And that's part of working it out, and it's part of learning. And for me personally, when this happens, I have so say, Dan, you're pushy. I have a drive to be as direct and clear as possible. And so when I'm writing, I don't want to mince words. I want to say things very clearly. And I think trying to make sure that, is this clear or is it hurtful? And I think that's part of it. And part of it is, for me, what I'm learning about this, I think, is to be sure to have the motivation be compassion. Sometimes clarity is necessary, and it is compassionate, but it doesn't have to be mean. It doesn't have to be angry. It can be very tender. I know this probably hurts. I'm going to have to give you some tough feedback. So working through it, I think, here's one of my favorite things. Let's just maintain a forward-facing orientation to life. Let's just keep moving forward. We're going to learn. We're going to use it as a platform. We're going to be better next time. And then we're just going to keep moving forward.
Right. That's great. So like admitting your mistakes, recognizing what was going on, seeing how you can course correct, apologizing if need be, and hopefully not repeating the same mistakes again. I think we've all at some point in time or another repeated the same thing. Like, oh, I can't believe I just did that again.
Oh!
No, yes, totally. Homer Simpson. No, that whole thing. We've had a number of really great comments going back and forth about this topic. James McKay loves what Brene Brown says on this. Whose opinions do you really care about when people say it? Rachel Hanfling, I love Rachel. She's amazing. If you do not know her, Dan, you need to know her. She's just an amazing human being on the planet. And former producer for Anderson Cooper, Oprah, all of that. She does speaker training and coaching and media training, but she loved the question around the perception of women and men and bringing the mommy
Yes.
in and all of that in. But, like we see these comments here and they're very positive comments because everybody wanted to see you on the show or have me back on the air. And I look at all of that, right? And I listen to the things that you've been talking about today because they're very deep. And so many of them are reflected in Bob's journey in the book, The Vagrant. You talk about them on your blog that you've had right since 2010, I think was when you first did it. And if I
Yes.
remember correctly, you credit your wife with pushing you to write. So it's listening to those voices of telling you things that you should be doing when you're not certain you should. So with all of that, Dan, what is next? You talk about moving forward, stepping forward, reflecting who you are. So for you, Poppy, you love to be Grandpa Poppy. What is your next thing, your next thought process? What do you want to have happen with this next phase where you've now written The Vagrant and taken your work to another level?
I'm already working on the next project, and that I have really three aspirations in life. They all reflect who I aspire to become. One aspiration is I want to live a simple life. I'm not into flash. I'm not into fancy. We live out in the country. I want it, I'm all about it. And so I aspire to live a simple life because that's who I am, a dairy farm boy from central Maine who now lives in north central Pennsylvania. And I don't want to milk cows ever again. But I'm still sort of that person on the inside.
Okay.
I want to continue to be better at writing, and I want to continue to be better at coaching. All of those things pull me into the future. And so for me, the next book I've been working on it really for over a year as we were working on this one. I love ideas. I'm fascinated by ideas. If I spend a day toying with ideas and reading research papers and learning something new, I'm reading the first man, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, right? And they were just writing about the biographer was writing about the Gemini capsule that he was in, and at first docking experience in space, and it started tumbling, and they almost died. And it's like, dinner time, I'm like telling my wife, I can't believe this. I'm just delighted to learn some sort of new thing. So learning and writing and becoming better, I just want to keep doing that. That's what's next for me.
That's wonderful. Is there any question that I didn't ask you that you wished I had?
No, listen, if you would ask me another question, we would be here for another hour because somehow I can't stop talking. So
Well, I've totally enjoyed it, so I'm not going to complain, Dan. But is there anything that I didn't ask that you wish I had?
You could have asked, what's going on today, or maybe you're going to already do this on Leadership Freak. We're giving away 5 copies a day of The Vagrant for the rest of this week. So if you go to the blog and leave a comment on today's post or on tomorrow or the next, and we'll let people know tomorrow morning who the 5 are. I don't pick them, but 5 people will get the book, and then every day the rest of this week we're going to give away 5 things. That's sort of transactional, but I guess that's something that I wanted to get out to everybody.
Okay, and they would go to leadershipfreak.blog in order to comment to get entered in to win one of the free copies of the book.
Yes.
Correct? Leadershipfreak.blog. And The Vagrant, which I'm going to hold up a copy of the cover for everybody that is watching online. and seeing the video, The Vagrant, Dan Rockwell and John David Mann, and it's available wherever books are sold, correct?
It is available wherever books are sold, or on Amazon, or Barnes and Noble, or go to your local independent bookstore.
And as we all know, putting up reviews after you've read the book on any of the platforms on social is one of the best ways to help support an author as a second step after buying the book. And I just know that this book, Dan, is going to be an incredible read for anybody who reads it. I've devoured it myself multiple times. So I want to thank you for finally stepping out and writing the book and reaching out to John David Mann so that you put this book together with him. And it's a dream to do a project with John myself. And I'm really thankful that you did it and that he introduced us so that we could meet here today. So thank you for being on the show and sharing your wisdom.
Yes, same here, Laura. I'm so thankful that John made this connection. You ask wonderful questions, and thank you for trusting me with your audience. I'm always very aware of that. So thank you for trusting me with your audience.
Well, thank you. And you're going to want to go check all the social media platforms, YouTube and everything, because people have made a number of comments. And James McKay has also given some thoughts on one of your possible next steps up there of how he'd like to see you out there some more. So thank you again for being here today. And I'm looking forward to watching the rankings move up for you. This, to me, has a potential to be the next New York Times bestseller. The book is that powerful.
Wow. Thank you, Laura.
Okay, everybody, I want to thank Dan for being here with me today, for all of those who were on social media and commenting about the show and Dan's comments. And I'm having trouble with my mouse. I'm trying to get to another screen. So The Vagrant is an exceptional book. Subscribe to the leadershipfreak.blog. Join Dan on social media. The idea of self-reflection as a leader is something that I have always found very useful in my career and when I coach my clients. Dan's slant on it of remembering not to self-reflect in a vacuum, that you need other people's input, is so important. And I would love for you to comment on this episode. Tell us how you're seeing yourself in leadership, what you think of the book, how you go about self-reflection, because at the end of the day, the right questions can change your life. So what are you asking yourself today? Have a great day, everyone. Grab a copy of Dan's book.
You've been listening to It's All About the Questions, starring Laura Stewart. Connect with Laura at it'sallaboutthequestions.com and download a free workbook that will help you ask better questions starting today.